Good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock. It is a beautiful, chilly Wednesday, and it's time for 10 with Tim. Each day, Monday through Friday, we take about 10 minutes, jump in verse by verse, and walk through the Word of God together. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your faithfulness to the Word of God and this time with me. I know a number of you joined me live. I know I freaked you out yesterday. Technical difficulties. Some of you now, y'all need to settle down. Like if it doesn't show up, like y'all think I'm dead or something terrible has happened. It's always technical difficulties. They haven't happened very much with us, and so I understand why you just think it's going to come on automatically. I do too. But yesterday I had some problems. Hopefully I worked everything out. And anyway, we're together today. Ezra chapter 8 verses 1 to 36 is where we are today. All of chapter 8. It's another one of those chapters with a list of names, and we'll get to that. It's Ezra's memoirs, as I said yesterday. This portion of Ezra now, starting at the end of the last chapter, is in the first person, and Ezra himself, who is, it's the name of the book is Ezra, but he really doesn't appear until now. And it's now that he is making his journey to Jerusalem with the decree from Artaxerxes, and he picks up with his story of how he made the journey. Now, he does give a list of those who made the trip with him. We're talking about over 900-mile journey. We're talking about a trip that takes over 4 months. It's difficult travel. They would travel in caravans. And so this is the assembly of that caravan. Now, Ezra says that they meet at the Ahava Canal. We don't know where that is. Nobody has any idea where that is. Only Ezra knows. It must have been a very wide, open place so that you could assemble that many people. We're talking about 5,000 people, which sounds like a lot of people. In this list here, you can count up about 1,500 men, so you can figure about 5,000 people in all. That's not a lot compared to, chapter 2, that last long list we read. That was like 42,000 people in those caravans. And so you can see that while people are still returning, they're not returning in the same numbers. I mean, years have gone by. Those who made the return in chapter 2, now we're in chapter 8, we're talking about probably 80 or 90 years. So it's a lifetime between these caravans coming in. So obviously those who were strongly inclined to go back home have probably gone back home. Those who are returning now, for whatever reason, they had stayed back in Babylon, in Persia, and are just now returning. So again, those numbers are dwindling. You're not seeing people coming back at the same rate. The other thing I would point about the list, and again, you don't have to love the list. I know it's reading the phone book. But if you read the phone book, you'll see that the names in chapter 8 are similar. If not, I think probably all of the names in chapter 8, the family names, also are in chapter 2, which just tells us that the people who were coming with Ezra in this caravan, they have family here already. So they've already, 80 years ago, Mamaw, she's already returned, and so now you have extended family coming to join family in Jerusalem. So some of that makes sense as to why these are making the trip with Ezra. The crisis, if you call it a crisis, is that when Ezra is assembling there at the Ahava Canal, and the giant 5,000 people caravan begins to assemble, and he's calling the roll and registering everybody to keep up with folks, right? He realizes that there are no Levites. No Levites. Now, the Levites are a tribe, of course, but they're also a very specific tribe, a very specific category of people, men in the people of Israel, because these are the worship leaders. Now, Ezra is a priest, and we have some priests, but we need worship leaders. The Levites, they were singers. They primarily, performed music in temple worship, but also they did nearly everything else. They're just temple servants, temple functionaries. They're just the ones that make, church happen. And again, not necessarily the preacher, but probably the music minister, right? It's that sort of thing, and there aren't any. And Ezra considers this, just a devastating kind of, lack. I guess because in many ways he can't imagine fulfilling all of that decree of Artaxerxes without people who are going to really serve in the temple, without Levites. And so, he sends out an email, trying to get some Levites present. So where are the Levites exactly? Well, it's funny. It's not in the Bible, not in our Bible, but there's a rabbinic tradition, a story that the Jews tell as to why Ezra couldn't find any Levites. There were so few Levites coming back to Jerusalem. And the rabbi story goes back to Psalm 137, where by the rivers of Babylon we lay down and wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps in the willows, because our captors were trying to force us to sing, songs in a strange language. Remember that psalm? I think it's Psalm 137. Well, the rabbis read that psalm and take it a step further. They see that part where the captors were trying to force the Levites to sing, forcing the Levites to play their harps in the Babylonian temples, to use their worship gifts in the service of pagan gods. And the Levites refused to do that. So the rabbis say that in Babylon, the Levites, many of them chewed off the fingers of their right hand. Again, it ain't in the Bible, but it's Jewish tradition that the Levites refused to be forced to play their harps in the Babylonian temples for pagan gods. And so they chewed their fingers off so that they couldn't play the harp at all. And so they hung them on the willows. You understand, from Psalm 137. I know. That's not in the Bible. But it's interesting because, again, that's the rabbi's explanation as to why there were no Levites. Because, understand, if they were disfigured in that way, if they chewed their own fingers off, any sort of disfigurement means that they are disqualified to serve in the temple. So again, that is not in the Bible, but I think that's interesting. Just the trauma of having been captive, the trauma of having been exiled. And again, it's interesting. Had you been a temple musician, it would make sense that the Babylonians would try to force you to use your gifts in their service, and the Levites perhaps had to resist that. I don't know, not in the Bible. I guess the one thing we can say is that simply Babylon had become home. It seems hard for us to understand because the people of God, you would think they would long for Jerusalem. But again, you're talking second generation, Babylonians, that they had Jewish heritage, but they had never seen Jerusalem, never lived in Jerusalem, and didn't have any real desire to go back. They had lives in Babylon. So most people just say that there weren't any Levites because honestly, they had good jobs back in Babylon. They were respected, professionals, doctors, lawyers, dentists, IT workers. But to go be a Levite in Jerusalem, in a land of rubble, and a Levite wasn't a good paying job. It was mostly a servant's role in the temple, kind of like now, some of you, if you've ever been called to ministry in your family, say, well, you're going to be broke your whole life? Most people don't see ministry as a step up. And so the explanation that most people read is just simply Levites really didn't want to leave their prosperous lives in Babylon to go serve the Lord in Jerusalem. It's not that different today. I'll be honest with you. Right now in the state of Kentucky, there is a dangerous I say dangerous. There's a dangerous lack of people who want to go into ministry, especially coming out of COVID. There's so many churches without pastors, and nobody wants to do it. Nobody ever got rich. Well, Joel Osteen, but the rest of us don't get rich in ministry. Families. There aren't a whole lot of families encouraging their kids to go into ministry. So in the same way that Ezra couldn't, had to really go recruiting Levites, I guess we need to start recruiting some folks into ministry as well. So the journey is long. I love the part, I'm over time. I love the part where Ezra says, we kind of really needed military escort, but I already told Artaxerxes that the Lord would take care of us. And I really didn't want to, I didn't want to now go back and ask for protection if God was going to protect us. I love that tension within him because he knows that God's going to protect him. He also kind of knows that, maybe God will protect us through, some dudes with guns. But he doesn't want Artaxerxes to misunderstand. And so for that reason, he just decides to trust the Lord and go. Nehemiah, if you remember, in the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah does have an armed guard with him, and he considers that part of God's providence. So you got two men, both following the leadership of the Lord, both doing the right thing, but they make separate decisions. And I just think that's kind of interesting. Listen, I will wrap it up there. We'll pick up here tomorrow. Tomorrow, chapter 9, verses 1 to 15. At the end of this 4-month, 900-mile journey, Ezra begins his ministry, and it's fantastic. Listen, have a great Wednesday. Enjoy the sunshine today. I will see you tomorrow, Lord willing, 10 o'clock for Tim with Tim. I love you guys. Have a good day.